Case 1. Willa Glendora Blank. February 2009. Union, Kentucky. Walter Sartori was 73 years old, a retired scientist from Oak Ridge National Laboratory who had helped design nuclear reactors and held 3 patents. He was also a millionaire, a net worth somewhere between $2 and $14 million, who suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. He believed the CIA was spying on him through trained ants. He filled his garage with computers searching for alien life. Willa Blank had been cleaning his neighbor's home when she first noticed him. She was 47. Her house was in foreclosure. She owed money everywhere. She drove a red Corvette and wore Versace eyeglasses. And investigators later found a book in her home that resembled a guide on selecting a target. She worked her way into Sartori's life as a caregiver. He grew suspicious. He changed his locks, told friends he believed she was trying to scam him. None of it saved him. Sometime around February 16th or 17th, 2009, Walter Sartori was abducted and taken to the basement of Blanc's home. He was restrained and sedated for 6 days. On February 22nd, he died. Prosecutors believe he suffocated. Blanc and her son then placed Sartori's remains in a 50-gallon plastic container, drove across state lines into Indiana, and burned what was left of him in a field. When friends asked what they were doing, she said they needed to burn a dead dog. The charred remains and a pair of scorched, steel-rimmed spectacles were found in an Indiana field on March 13th, 2009. Blank and her son were arrested the following day at a motel in Ohio. In December 2011, Blanc pleaded guilty to 9 counts, including capital kidnapping. On January 4th, 2012, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As of February 2026, Willa Blank remains incarcerated in a Kentucky correctional facility. Case 2, Karen Baragi, December 24th, 2011, Spring Hill, Florida. It was Christmas Eve. The front yard of the home on Graynolds Avenue was decorated with Disney lawn ornaments, Mickey and Minnie Mouse, a large snow globe, holiday lights. A license plate on the driveway read DSNE Nut. The car's bumper said, "Magic is everywhere." Inside, Alan Baragi was asleep on the living room couch. He was 31 years old, an air conditioning repairman who also delivered newspapers for the Tampa Bay Times. Neighbors described him as the kind of man who always waved as he drove past. His wife Karen was 39. She had discovered a secret phone he had been using to communicate with a woman he planned to move in with after Christmas. She had read the messages. She knew everything. That morning, Karen drove to a pawn shop and collected a revolver she had placed a down payment on 3 days earlier. She returned home, found the phone, loaded the gun with 6 bullets, and then she stood over Alan's sleeping body for approximately 1 full hour. She didn't leave. She didn't call anyone. She stood there holding the loaded weapon for 60 minutes. Then she fired. Alan never moved. He was shot twice in the back of the head at close range. Karen then drove to her parents' home a few blocks away, told her mother she had something to tell her, and called 911. She told the dispatcher, "I'm turning myself in for killing my husband. Dean, he's on the couch right now." In March 2013, Karen Baragi pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. As of February 2026, she remains incarcerated in the Florida Department of Corrections. Case 3, Cecile Brousar, February 28, 2005. Geneva, Switzerland. Edward Stern was 50 years old, heir to a powerful French banking dynasty, one of the wealthiest men in France, a close personal friend of then-future President Nicolas Sarkozy. He was the kind of man who received death threats from business rivals, so he installed high-tech security throughout his apartment and kept a firearm by his bed. None of it mattered. When his employees couldn't reach him for a scheduled meeting, they sent someone to check. But what they found inside that apartment was unlike anything Geneva, one of the safest cities in the world, had ever seen. Cecile Brousar was 40 years old, a blonde from the Paris suburbs who had been Stern's lover for 4 years. Their relationship was described in court as passionate and full of emotional blackmail. Stern had given her $1 million as a gesture of love. Then he changed his mind and blocked the account. On the night of February 28th, they argued over that money. Stern reportedly told her the $1 million was too much to pay. Brousar later described feeling an explosion inside her head. She reached for his own bedside firearm. She fired 4 times. After the shooting, she cleaned the scene, disposed of evidence in Lake Geneva, and boarded a flight. She made it all the way to Sydney, into Australia, before her nerve broke. She saw Stern's death on the front page of a newspaper. She had a breakdown in a Singapore airport during her layover and flew back. Swiss police arrested her the moment she walked through customs in Zurich. In June 2009, Cecile Brousar was convicted of murder and sentenced to 8 years and 6 months in prison. She was released on parole in November 2010 after serving 5 years. Her current whereabouts are unknown. Case 4, Rosemary Penny Bjorkland, February 1st, 1959, Daly City, California. She woke up, got dressed, tucked a revolver into her waistband, and walked out the front door. She had made a decision. Today she was going to take someone's life. Not out of rage, not out of fear, purely out of curiosity. Her name was Rosemary Bjorkland. Everyone called her Penny. She was 18 years old, wore strawberry blonde hair, ruby red lipstick, a regular girl from a regular family in a regular neighborhood. By every outward appearance, she was completely normal. August Nori was 28, a Korean War veteran, a former minor league baseball player, a dance instructor. His wife Darlene was pregnant with their first child. Penny had met him only once before, a chance encounter during a walk. On this Sunday morning, he offered her a ride. She accepted. And somewhere on the road, through the San Bruno Mountains, she pulled out the gun and opened fire. When the gun emptied, she reloaded. Then she reloaded again. By the time she was done, August Nori had sustained 18 bullet wounds. She drove his car through a barbed wire fence, left his body in the scrub brush, ditched the car, walked home, and sat down to dinner with her family. Here's the detail that makes this case unforgettable. When police finally caught Penny 2 months later and asked her why she had done it, she said, "I've had the urge to kill someone for about 1.5 years. I wanted to know if I could do it and not have it on my conscience." Police traced the crime through a rare custom-molded bullet. Detectives tracked the unique ammunition back to a friend who had sold it to Penny. She was waiting at home when they arrived. She allowed the search without flinching. In July 1959, Penny Bjorkland pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 7 years. She reportedly told the judge, "I am unhappy." Nothing more. She was paroled sometime in the mid-1960s. After that, she vanished. No public records, no trace. To this day, nobody knows where Penny Bjorkland went. Case 5, Marott Bosch. June 16, 1996. Gaborone, Botswana. Marott Bosch was 46. A sophisticated church-going, cake-baking member of Gaborone wealthy South African expatriate community. She decorated porcelain dolls. She was known for her elegance, her poise, and her warm smile. She was also sleeping with her best friend's husband. Maria Volmerans had been one of Marott's closest friends. They took craft classes together, socialized in the same circles. Ria had no idea that Marott and her husband, Tienye, had been carrying on a secret affair since the death of Marott's first husband in 1995. Tienye kept promising to leave. He never did. So Marott decided to handle it herself. She traveled to South Africa and obtained her late father's 9mm pistol under the pretense of needing protection, then smuggled it across the border into Botswana. On the evening of June 16th, she drove 2 blocks from her own home to the Volmerans' residence. She scaled the 6-foot security wall, entered the house, and shot Ria twice in the hallway. Police initially suspected a burglary. Nothing added up. No windows were broken. Nothing of value was taken. The entry point was that wall, not a door. Then Marott's sister-in-law came forward. She had found the gun. She took it straight to police. Ballistics matched immediately. And here is the detail that prosecutors described as breathtaking. Just 3 months after Ria's death, Marott had ordered a custom wedding dress from a designer in Pretoria. Prosecutors summarized the motive as the 4 L's: love, loot, lust, and loathing. The judge called her wicked and despicable. She was convicted of murder in December 1999 and sentenced to death by hanging. On March 31st, 2001, Marott Bosch was executed. Her family learned she was gone from a radio news bulletin while driving to the prison to visit her. Case 6. Amy Bishop Anderson. February 12th, 2010. Huntsville, Alabama. Amy Bishop was 45, a Harvard-educated biologist, a mother of 4, a professor at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. She was also, investigators would later discover, a woman with a history that should have raised serious alarms long before this day. In 1986, she had fatally shot her 18-year-old brother in the family home, ruled an accident. In 1994, a mail bomb was sent to a former boss who had given her a negative evaluation. No charges were filed. In 2002, it said she punched a woman in the head at a restaurant over a booster seat dispute. In March 2009, the university denied Amy Bishop tenure. She appealed. Multiple times. She lost every appeal. By February 2010, her final semester was underway. On February 12th, Bishop attended a routine department faculty meeting in room 369 of the Shelby Center. Roughly 12 colleagues sat around an oval table. For 40 minutes, she sat unusually silent. Then, without warning, she stood up, reached into her purse, and opened fire on the people closest to her. Department Chairman Gopi Podilla, Professor Maria Ragland Davis, and Professor Adriel Johnson were killed. 3 others were wounded. When the firearm stopped, a colleague confronted her. Other faculty members pushed Bishop out of the room and barricaded the door. when she was arrested outside the building minutes later, calmly walking toward the parking lot. When police detained her, she said, "It didn't happen. I wasn't there." In September 2012, Amy Bishop pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In January 2025, the Alabama Supreme Court rejected her latest appeal. As of February 2026, Amy Bishop remains incarcerated at the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. Case 7. Elfreda Blowensteiner, Vienna, Austria. The early 1990s. Elfreda Blowensteiner was born in 1931. By the time she was in her 60s, she had developed two obsessions: gambling, which consumed her, and pharmacy, which she taught herself in private. She visited casinos approximately 230 times a year. She needed money, and she had found a very specific method to get it. She placed personal advertisements in Austrian newspapers, presenting herself as a warm, caring woman seeking companionship with elderly gentlemen. The men who responded were typically wealthy, isolated, and in need of support. Elfreda called herself their caregiver. Her method was clinical. She would administer massive doses of a blood sugar-lowering medication called euglucon, sometimes up to 70 doses, hidden in milk. This would induce a coma-like state. She would then place the victim in a bathtub of cold water, apply ice packs, and open the windows to the winter cold. She would call emergency services only once she was certain they would arrive too late. Investigators believe she used this method on at least 4 victims, including a 77-year-old retiree, a 64-year-old husband who had transferred his home to her, an 84-year-old neighbor, and her own second husband. All of them died shortly after their assets were signed over to her. The case broke when the nephew of one victim grew suspicious after discovering a revised will. A toxicology report confirmed lethal doses of medication. Elfreda was arrested in January 1996. At trial, she appeared clutching a small golden crucifix, telling the court, "My hands are clean. I've nothing to hide." She was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to life in prison. Elfreda Blowensteiner died of a brain tumor on November 18, 2003 at the age of 72, still incarcerated. Case 8. Diane Borchard, April 3, 1994. Easter Sunday, Jefferson, Wisconsin. Reuben Borchard was 40 years old, a foreman and skilled cabinet maker, known for a smile that could, as friends put it, light up any room. He had filed for divorce in January 1994, after years of a deteriorating marriage. A court order had recently given him custody of his son, and his estranged wife had been told to vacate the family home by mid-April. Diane Borchard, 44, worked as a teacher's aide and study hall monitor at the local high school. She had told colleagues the divorce would leave her with nothing. She wasn't wrong, and she wasn't willing to accept it. Over several weeks in early 1994, Diane met privately with a 17-year-old student from her study hall. She told him Reuben had abused her. She laid out what she wanted. She offered her wedding ring, 2 cars, and $600 in cash as a down payment. The student recruited 2 other teenagers. At 3:30 in the morning on Easter Sunday, 3 teenagers entered the family home. Reuben encountered them near the basement stairs. He was shot once in the chest. As he attempted to flee, he was shot again in the back. He collapsed into the basement. His teenage son found him slumped in a chair. Ruben's last words were, "I can't believe she would do this to me." Diane had driven 200 miles away that weekend to establish an alibi. The case cracked when one teenager told a friend. A secret legal investigation uncovered a hand-drawn map Diane had provided to guide the boys to her home. She was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide and sentenced to life in prison. She will not be eligible for parole until 2035. As of February 2026, Diane Borchard remains incarcerated in the Wisconsin prison system. Case 9. Betty Broderick. On November 5, 1989, San Diego, California. Dan Broderick was 44, a highly successful medical malpractice attorney. Linda Kulkina Broderick was 28, a former airline attendant who had become Dan's receptionist and then his wife. After a years-long affair while he was still married to Betty, Betty Broderick had spent the 1970s supporting Dan through medical school and then law school. She worked multiple jobs. They survived on food stamps. She raised 4 children largely alone while he built a career worth millions. By the mid-1980s, he was one of San Diego's most prominent attorneys. Then he left. And he used the very legal system he had mastered to methodically dismantle her in the divorce, sealing courtroom proceedings, building enormous financial penalties, ultimately winning custody of their children. And the 4 years that followed were a slow escalation. Betty drove her car through his front door, left obscene messages on his answering machine. Prosecutors later played hundreds of recordings. In March 1989, she purchased a revolver and took shooting lessons. At 5:30 on the morning of November 5th, using a key she had obtained from her daughter's purse, Betty entered Dan and Linda's home. She fired all 5 rounds. Linda died instantly. Dan managed to reach for the phone before he was struck. His last words were, "Okay, you shot me. I'm dead." Betty turned herself in the same day. Her first trial ended in a hung jury. In 1991, she was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 32 years to life. As of February 2026, Betty Broderick remains incarcerated in a California state prison when her 2010 parole bid was denied with a 15-year delay, the maximum allowable by law. Case 10. Chamilleia Brown. March 24, 2006. Pullen Park, Raleigh, North Carolina. Earl Thierry Brown was 42 years old, an employee of the North Carolina Department of Revenue, a kidney transplant recipient, a father described by his neighbors as a good daddy who was always there for his children. In 2001, he had divorced Chamilleia Brown after a 5-year marriage. By 2005, he held sole legal custody of their 2 young children. Chamilleia Brown was 47. She had spent the years after the divorce waging a relentless legal campaign, making allegations against Earl, violating protective orders, moving into an apartment specifically chosen because it overlooked his backyard. And she once wore a wig to sneak past court-ordered restrictions at her children's school. A judge had ruled that her behavior had traumatized the children to a degree legally classified as abuse. In January 2006, her final custody appeal was denied. On the evening of March 24th, Chamilleia met Earl at Pullen Park for what should have been a routine handoff. The children were inside his car eating pizza. Earl stepped out. Chamilleia produced a .22 caliber revolver. and fired a single shot into his torso. Earl called 911 from the ground. "I'm at Pullen Park. I've been shot," he told the dispatcher. Chamilleia took the phone from his hand and said, "I killed you. I killed you." She could then be heard telling the children to pray. Earl Brown died at the hospital early the following morning. Chamilleia Brown was found mentally incompetent and spent years in a state hospital before pleading guilty to second-degree murder in February 2013. She was sentenced to 16 to 20 years, with credit for the 7 years already served. As of February 2026, she remains incarcerated. Case 11. Sandra Bridewell. Dallas, Texas, a 10-year stretch from 1975 to 1985. Sandra Camille Bridewell was glamorous by every measure. Mink coats, fine furniture, old paintings, a social calendar that made her a fixture in Dallas's most exclusive circles. She was also, according to investigators and journalists who spent years on her trail, one of the most dangerous people those circles ever welcomed in. David Stegel, her first husband, was found dead in bed in March 1975. Slashed wrists, a gunshot wound to the head, ruled a suicide. And Sandra was his sole beneficiary. Betsy Bagwell was 40 years old and one of Sandra's closest friends, the wife of a prominent oncologist. On June 16, 1982, she was found deceased in her Mercedes at the Dallas airport. Sandra was the last person to see her alive. A firearm was in her hand. No note. The case was closed. Alan Rehrig was 29, Sandra's third husband. He had married her in December 1984, unaware of her massive debts. She was spending $20,000 a month, or that her claimed pregnancy was physically impossible, as she had undergone a hysterectomy years earlier. By November 1985, he had left her. On December 7, 1985, he went to meet her at a storage facility and disappeared. His body was found in his vehicle in Oklahoma City 4 days later. He had been fatally shot. Sandra fled Dallas, who spent years under aliases across multiple states. In 2007, she was finally arrested in a North Carolina cafe, not for murder, but for identity theft and fraud. She pleaded guilty and served 2 years in federal prison. As of February 2026, Sandra Bridewell has served her sentence and was released around 2010. She has never been charged with any of the 3 deaths. Her current whereabouts are unknown. We're halfway through, and I have to ask you something. Like and share this video. Thank you. We're just getting started. Case 12, Penny Boudreau, January 27, 2008, Hebville, Nova Scotia, Canada. Carissa Boudreau was 12 years old. She enjoyed video games, dancing, and singing in her room. She had recently moved from her father's home to live with her mother Penny in Bridgewater. She had chosen to be there. Penny Boudreau was 34. She had a boyfriend named Vernon McCumber, who did not get along with Carissa. He made the situation clear. It was the girl or him. Penny began to see her daughter not as a child, but as an obstacle, and worse, as someone who might expose her as a bad mother. On a dark, snowy January night, Penny drove Carissa out to a remote road on the pretense of having a private talk. They argued. Penny tackled Carissa to the ground and strangled her with a length of twine. She then staged the scene to suggest a different crime entirely, rolled the body down a riverbank, and drove home. That evening, she reported her daughter missing. She claimed Carissa had disappeared from a supermarket parking lot while she waited in the car. She held tearful press conferences. She made public appeals, and the community launched a massive search. 14 days later, Carissa's frozen body was found on the bank of the Lehigh River. Police had no direct evidence until they ran a sting operation. Undercover officers posing as organized crime figures convinced Penny they could make any evidence disappear. She confessed everything in full. She was arrested the same evening. The agreed statement of facts read in court revealed that as Penny strangled her daughter, Carissa's last words were, "Mummy, don't." Penny Boudreau pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in January 2009 and was sentenced to life with no parole for 20 years. As of February 2026, she remains incarcerated in a Canadian federal penitentiary. Case 13. Kathy Boudin. October 20th, 1981. Nanuet, New York. Kathy Boudin was 38 years old. She is daughter of a prominent civil rights attorney, a Harvard-adjacent radical who had spent the previous 11 years living underground as a member of the Weather Underground organization, a domestic extremist group responsible for bombings across the United States throughout the 1970s. In 1970, she had narrowly escaped an explosion in a Greenwich Village townhouse where her co-conspirators were building a bomb that detonated prematurely. On the morning of October 20th, 1981, Boudin dropped her infant son at a babysitter's house. Then she drove to Nanuet Mall. That afternoon, members of the Black Liberation Army robbed a Brinks armored truck, seizing $1.6 million. A security guard, Peter Page, was killed. Another was critically wounded, and the group loaded into a red van and transferred to a U-Haul truck where Boudin and her partner were waiting. Police set up a roadblock. Boudin stepped out of the truck with her hands raised. She pleaded with officers to lower their weapons, told them everything was fine. The officers began to relax. Then 6 armed men burst from the back of the truck. Officer Waverly Brown was killed instantly. Sergeant Edward O'Grady was shot multiple times. He died 90 minutes later at the hospital. Both left families behind. O'Grady had given his bulletproof vest to a rookie officer that morning. Boudin was captured minutes later by an off-duty corrections officer. She gave a false name upon arrest. She pleaded guilty to felony murder and robbery and was sentenced to 20 years to life. She was released on parole in 2003 and later became an adjunct professor at Columbia University. Kathy Boudin died in May 2022. Case 14. Linda Lyon Block. October 4th, 1993. Opelika, Alabama. Linda Lyon Block was 45. A former magazine editor, long-distance sailor, and Humane Society volunteer who had gradually become consumed by anti-government ideology. She and her partner, George Sibley, had destroyed their birth certificates, driver's licenses, and social security cards. They believed the United States government held no legal authority over them. They were also fugitives. The previous month, the pair had fled Florida to avoid sentencing for an assault involving Block's elderly former husband. On the afternoon of October 4th, Block, Sibley, and Block's young son were parked outside a shopping center in Opelika. A passerby grew concerned for the boy and alerted Sergeant Roger Motley of the Opelika Police Department. Sergeant Motley was 39 years old, described by his wife as a kind and patient man. He had spent his lunch break shopping for supplies for the jail. He located the vehicle, approached, and asked Sibley for his license. Sibley said he didn't need one. As Motley reached toward his holster, Sibley drew first. Motley took cover behind his cruiser. Block heard the shots from a payphone nearby. She dropped the receiver, pulled a 9mm from her purse, and moved into a crouching position. Motley managed to radio a distress signal before he was struck and fell. He was not wearing his bulletproof vest that day. He had given it to a rookie officer. After a 4-hour standoff, Block and Sibley surrendered, and she served as her own attorney at trial, arguing self-defense. The jury recommended death by a vote of 10-2. On May 10, 2002, Linda Lyon Block was executed by electric chair at Holman Correctional Facility. She was the first woman executed in Alabama since 1957. She requested no final meal and made no final statement. Case 15, Lizzy Bordon, August 4, 1892, Fall River, Massachusetts. Andrew Bordon was 70, a bank president and one of Fall River's wealthiest men, famous for his rigid frugality. His second wife, Abby, was 64. Despite Andrew's fortune, the family home lacked indoor plumbing on the lower floors, and they lived near the factory district rather than the fashionable neighborhood where Andrew's wealth could have placed them. That morning was unusually hot. Andrew left for his usual rounds. The household maid, Bridget, washed windows before retreating upstairs to rest. Andrew returned home around 10:45 and lay down on the parlor couch. At 11:10, his daughter Lizzy called out from downstairs, "Maggie, come quick. Father's dead. Somebody came in and killed him." Andrew had sustained 10 to 11 blows to the head. When investigators searched upstairs, they found Abby Bordon in the guest room. She had been struck 18 to 19 times and had been dead for approximately an hour before Andrew, meaning she was the first to be attacked, not the second. Lizzy Bordon was 32 years old. She taught Sunday school. She volunteered with charitable organizations. She had no prior history of violence. She also had no convincing explanation for her whereabouts during either attack, and a witness later testified to seeing her burn a dress in the kitchen stove several days after the murders. A hatchet head was found in the basement, handle missing, clean of any trace evidence. It was never definitively linked to the crime. Lizzy was tried for 3 counts of murder in June 1893. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes and returned a verdict of not guilty. The town of Fall River never accepted that verdict. Lizzy Bordon was shunned for the remainder of her life. She died on June 1st, 1927 at age 66. Her sister died 9 days later. The case has never been officially solved. Case 16, Amy Bosley, May 17, 2005. A remote luxury cabin in Campbell County, Kentucky. Robert Bob Bosley was 41. He had built $1 million chimney sweep and roofing empire from scratch. He was well liked in the community, described by neighbors as the kind of man who would give you the shirt off his back. He spent weekends on his 50-foot motor yacht at Lake Cumberland. His wife, Amy, 38, ran the books for their business. She had been running them into the ground for years. She had siphoned money, failed to pay nearly $1.7 million in IRS taxes, and spent months impersonating Bob over the phone to keep federal agents at bay. On May 17th, an IRS audit was scheduled for the business. The auditors were due that morning. At 5 a.m., Amy called 911 in hysterics. She said an intruder had broken in and fired on her husband. She described a tall, mean-faced white male in his 30s. Bob had been shot 6 times, while asleep in bed. Investigators found the staging almost immediately, and the glass panel in the back door was broken. But the children told investigators they heard the glass shatter after the gunshots, not before. 2 shell casings were found near Bob's body. More were discovered inside the washing machine. Amy was arrested 10 days after the crime. 1 week later, police found the firearm concealed in a purse tucked in the back of a kitchen cupboard. In November 2006, Amy Bosley pleaded guilty to murder to spare her children from testifying. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Prosecutors and Bob's family believe she buried the embezzled money on the family's 35-acre property and intended to retrieve it upon release. As of February 2026, Amy Bosley has completed her minimum sentence and may be eligible for parole. Case 17. Jody Lynn Bowman. January 20th, 2003. Mico, Florida. George Jupin was 40. He had a history that included armed robbery and time in prison. By the time he moved into Jody Bowman's home in April 2002, the household was deeply entangled in drug use. His body was covered in tattoos. He was known to disappear for days at a time. Jody Bowman was 33. She had 2 young daughters. She had been told by her youngest, then just a toddler, that Jupin had engaged in inappropriate behavior during a game he called the Bear Game. Jody kept her daughter close after that. On the morning of January 20th, Jody left her daughter watching television while she did household chores. When she realized the girl was no longer in the room, she found the master bedroom door locked. She retrieved the key. She opened the door. What she saw inside made her step back outside, take her daughter out to the backyard, zip her into a small tent, and return to the house armed with a handgun. George Jupin was shot 9 times. The final fatal shot was to the head. Prosecutors argued that Jody had already secured her daughter before returning to shoot him, eliminating the immediate threat defense. They said the molestation claim was fabricated, motivated by jealousy over Jupin's other relationships. The defense said she acted to protect her child, that Jupin had threatened her, that he had lunged at her when she re-entered the room. The jury of 3 men and 3 women deliberated for 9 hours. In May 2004, they returned a verdict of not guilty on all charges. Jody Lynn Bowman walked out of that courtroom a free woman. No further legal action was taken. Case 18. Amy Lee Black. December 7th, 1990. Muskegon, Michigan. To David Van Boeglen was 34. He lived in Sullivan Township. He had a wife named Barb and a daughter named Amanda. On the evening of December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, he was at a restaurant in Muskegon Heights, visibly intoxicated and openly carrying a large amount of cash. Amy Lee Black was 16 years old. She had left her mother's home in Kalamazoo weeks earlier. She had no job, no school, no plan. She had a boyfriend named Jeff Abrahamson who was 19. And she later told investigators she had always wondered whether a person could commit a serious crime and simply not get caught. That night, she and Abrahamson made a plan. They invited Van Boeglen back to their apartment. When he failed to lose consciousness from drinking, Black struck him over the head with a heavy whiskey bottle. Abrahamson followed. They took approximately $1,500 from his jacket pocket. They drove him to a remote 2-track road outside of town. Abrahamson inflicted multiple stab wounds. Van Boeglen died there. Black and Abrahamson returned to the apartment cleaned up, discarded furniture soaked in blood, and spent part of the stolen money on new clothes. 3 days later, police tracked them to an uncle's house in Barry County. They were asleep when officers arrived. Shortly after arrest, Black voluntarily gave a taped confession. She admitted to everything, adding, "I always wanted to know if you could just kill somebody and the cops not know. I didn't kill him, but I helped out my fair share." In July 1991, Amy Lee Black was sentenced as an adult to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As of February 2026, and she remains incarcerated at the Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Michigan. Case 19. Priscilla Bradford. March 28, 1980. Melbourne, Florida. John Bradford was an optometrist. He owned a successful optical laboratory and had told friends and family he believed someone was trying to harm him. He had already survived what appeared to be a poisoning attempt. A heavy dose of a stimulant placed in his morning orange juice. He had been attacked at his office by an unknown assailant. He had changed his will twice. Despite all of it, he continued living in the same house as his wife, Priscilla. Priscilla Bradford was 36. She wanted the business. According to an 18-year-old co-conspirator, who later made a statement to police, the goal was simple. An all-female laboratory, fully controlled, fully funded by John's death. Priscilla recruited 2 women, Joyce Cummings and Janice Gould, to join her. On the evening of March 28, 1980, all 3 waited inside the home. When John returned from work, they attacked him with kitchen implements for 15 full minutes. The assault was severe. John Bradford was still alive. Priscilla then summoned her teenage daughter Eden to the room. She handed the girl a cast iron skillet and a heavy metal bottle capper. Her instructions were direct. Keep hitting him. Anywhere. John Bradford died from the injuries. Eden was granted immunity and testified for the state. She described hearing her stepfather struggling to breathe, and described what those final moments sounded like. Priscilla Bradford pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. On August 4th, 1980, she was sentenced to life in prison. She remained incarcerated until her death on July 20th, 2007, inside a Florida correctional facility. She had served 27 years. Case 20 to Brenda Brchie, November 26, 2004, Florence County, South Carolina. Randy Brchie was 54. He worked at a container plant on the night shift. He was a diabetic who required daily medication. His marriage to Brenda had deteriorated to the point of court-ordered protection. She was legally prohibited from contacting him. She had violated that order twice in the days before he disappeared. He had recently begun seeing another woman. He knew Brenda was aware of this. On the morning of November 26th, Randy finished his shift and drove home. His work clothes and lunchbox were found inside the house. His diabetes medication and blood pressure pills were left on the counter, items he never went without. His truck was discovered at a boat landing nearby. That evening, a witness saw a woman in camouflage gear leaving that same landing. That witness later identified Brenda Brchie. Randy was reported missing. Days became months. Months became years. Brenda continued to live in their mobile home on the property. She denied knowing anything. In July 2009, nearly 5 years after Randy's disappearance, a new landowner had the mobile home moved from its foundation. Beneath the concrete slab where the home had sat, wrapped in a tarp, was a human skull. Forensic specialists identified it as Randy Brchie. Brenda was arrested in December 2009 during a routine traffic stop. at trial, and the jury never heard that she had privately confessed to the killing Trixward. The confession was suppressed on legal grounds. The case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. It was enough. In April 2012, Brenda Brchie was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. As of February 2026, she remains incarcerated in the South Carolina Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. If any of these cases stayed with you, share this video, or someone else needs to hear these stories. Subscribe to Crime Lens for more. This has been Crime Lens. We'll see you in the next one.